the people who won this war are practically exactly the same people who have been hounding Trump for the past 8 years, putting him through one impeachment after another, uh, roasting him in the media 24/7. And now suddenly he's championing their cause. None of that makes any sense to me.
You know, Alex raises a very curious point here. Politics often produces these strange alignments that defy simple logic. When longtime opponents suddenly appear to share interests, it's usually not because they've genuinely reconciled differences, but because there are deeper strategic calculations at play. In foreign policy, alliances often shift based on immediate objectives rather than shared values. It reminds us how fluid and transactional global power politics can be, even when individuals like Trump are involved. What matters most is not the rhetoric, but the actual outcomes on the ground.
If the American attack on Iran looks like a lot of fireworks and nothing meaningful, then maybe it was a deal. And then if Iranian retaliation is the same, then more reason to think that it was a deal. And so the whole thing started to remind me of the World Wrestling Federation, where, they make this big show of great violence and these big fights, but it's all fake, right? And then, everything is garnished and backed up with the trash talk that's equally like abrasive and violent, but also fake. These people then go for a drink together and have a barbecues and so forth. So I thought, let's see. Anyway, as it turns out, the U.S. attacks on Iran were, negligible, didn't achieve a thing. Iranian retaliation against the United States, same thing, nothing happened. They told them we're going to hit this base. So they evacuated everybody, not a single casualty, right? And then everybody turns around and declares victory.
This entire exchange feels eerily reminiscent of theatrical posturing we've seen throughout history: loud threats, controlled responses, and ultimately a carefully choreographed avoidance of full-scale war. While this may seem absurd to many, it's often a calculated way for major powers to save face while preventing uncontrollable escalation. In one sense, it's a relief, but it also reveals just how precarious global stability really is.
And now they're going to negotiate peace, and J.D. Vance is announcing a new era of peace and prosperity in the Middle East. And the Iranians are committing to a ceasefire, and the Israelis are committing to a ceasefire. So it seems to me that Trump did exactly what I suspected he would do. He put himself at the head of the stampeding herd, and basically he led them and then led them astray. So in the end, the United States avoided going to war against Iran. There was no regime change in Iran, which is exactly what the neocons wanted. And the United States carries on negotiating with Iran and mediating peace with Israel, along with the Qataris. So far, so good, Andy. But the problem is still Syria,
Syria remains one of the most tragic, unresolved crises of our time. The suffering endured by civilians there over the past decade is beyond heartbreaking. And unfortunately, as Alex hints, regional conflicts often serve as proxies for greater geopolitical rivalries. It's a painful reminder that diplomacy should always be pursued with urgency to spare innocent lives from prolonged hardship.
Because, the neocons are not as powerful in the United States, even though they're very, very few and they represent essentially nobody. They're not that powerful just like that, the somebody's backing them. And it looks to me that there's a lot of interlocking relationships between leading neocons and people in the British foreign policy establishment and the intelligence agencies. And, for them, the name of the game is not peace or stability. It's hegemony. And the requirement to defend the hegemony is obviously to have decisive mediation role in, who gets what chunk of the Middle East to develop to as their market, as their natural resource wealth, and so forth. And so this always is going to be drawing back to the European colonial powers.
The shadow of colonial competition still looms large in modern geopolitics. While the overt empires have dissolved, many of the financial and strategic patterns persist. Control over resources, markets, and influence remains at the core of these power struggles, often at the expense of regional peace and sovereignty. It's a sobering continuity that shapes much of today's instability.
Like primarily Britain and France, but then also others to a lesser extent, like Holland, Belgium, and so forth. Anyway, the preservation of the Iranian regime and peace at this stage are running exactly counter of the European colonial interests. And, the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, and the Biden administration were all serving these European colonial interests, which is what I think is the problem in the United States, because, this is not just Trump opposing this. I think there's a much more broad-based opposition to this. And part of why Trump walked out on the JCPOA is because, again, the United States found itself in the position of kind of like a guarantor of the deal and, the chief policeman, while the spoils of this agreement were almost completely given to the European investment houses. So, long story short, it seems to me that Trump kind of tricked them all, that he cornered the Israelis, because, Benjamin Netanyahu was in such desperate dire straits politically that he had to jump on this and declare victory and celebrate his partnership with Trump and thank Trump profusely for, doing this and blah, blah, blah. And now that it turns out it's all fake, apparently, he can't just go out there and say, oh, I was duped. He has to own it now. It's very difficult to back out. And so now, even in Israel, there's a lot of talk about holding early elections, which will spell the end of Netanyahu's political career and probably his life as a free man. And then God knows what happens to Israel. Israel could descend into a civil war, as could Syria. And in fact, I think this could all be the end of the Zionist project as we know it. We have to always keep in mind, because this is something that, in pretty much has become a cultural fact, that Israel was created as a homeland for the, long-suffering Jewish people, where they would be safe and where they could live happily ever after. But in fact, that's a lie itself. The Israel has always been a British imperial project, which was, it was inserted into the Middle East exactly for the purpose of keeping it constantly destabilized. Israel has been pretty at war with one or the other of its neighbors.
This is a sensitive and complex part of the discussion. The creation of Israel was deeply rooted in the desire to provide safety and refuge for Jewish people after centuries of persecution. Yet, as Alex points out, strategic calculations by external powers often layered over those intentions. The constant cycle of conflict has tragically kept generations of people, both Israelis and their neighbors, trapped in cycles of fear, violence, and insecurity. The human cost on all sides remains devastating, underscoring the urgent need for genuine, sustainable peace efforts.
Pretty much the whole time since its creation. And it's been fulfilling that role because, it was Israelis who were like, oh, we have to take down Saddam Hussein. If you take down Saddam Hussein, region will be at peace. Oh, we have to take down Bashar al-Assad. If we do that, we're going to have peace. Oh, now we have to take out the Iranians. Oh, we need a regime change in Lebanon. We need to dismantle Hezbollah. Oh, we also need to dismantle Hamas, which we created ourselves because we wanted to sabotage the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Oh, we have to go to war against Yemen. And so, they have been there antagonizing their neighbors for decades, Egypt included, and then creating pretext for Western powers to come in and intervene. And that has pretty much been the recipe of having hegemony over the region. And so nobody was worried about Iranian nuclear weapons, just as nobody's concerned about Israeli nuclear weapons. They needed a regime change because they wanted a cooperative regime in Iran. But now what Trump has done is forcing Israelis into peace negotiations without delivering the regime change in Iran. So I think the situation is extremely interesting. And to me, this seems like a distinctly positive development. But we still have Syria. And Syria is now largely under the decisive influence of the British. The Turkish deep state is basically their proxy there, along with the jihadis, the HTS, and their president al-Jolani there. And so they could detonate a civil war in Syria to blow up any chance of peace between Iran and Israel, and to continue to destabilize the region because they will not stop until they have a regime change in Iran.
The pursuit of regime change historically has rarely led to stable outcomes. In many cases, such interventions have unleashed long-term instability, unintended consequences, and deepened resentment. The hope must be that cooler heads will recognize that genuine diplomatic engagement is far more sustainable than forcing outcomes through coercive means.
All things being equal, it would appear that Russia, China, Iran, not necessarily in order, are the big winners. Israel and the Western European powers are the big losers. And the United States is also a big winner here because, they are, let's not forget, at the beginning of Trump administration, before even the beginning of, 15th January 2025, Marco Rubio was at his confirmation hearings at the Senate, and he said two things. He said, post-World War II global order is more than obsolete, and it's being weaponized against the United States at this time. And the second thing he said is that multipolar integrations are the new reality in the world, and the United States intends to embrace this. So, they found, unless that was a con job to, get all their supporters on board, if they actually mean what they're saying, then that means that the United States has the intention of embracing multipolar integrations, which means cutting deals with the Russians, with the Iranians, with the Chinese, with the Indians, and, joining these groups of nations as a major power, but not as the hegemon, not as the global policeman, right? So that would be the winners. The losers would be the Israelis and the Western Europeans, particularly the British. But again, all things are never equal, and things are not going to stay static. My prediction would be, if I had to bet money on it, my prediction would be that the British are going to seek to trigger a civil war in Syria, and that will, draw in not only the Iranians, but also the Israelis and the Turks and the United States. and possibly Russia. That is, Russia has packed up to go. So they're still there in Tartus, but, with their bags packed so they can, quickly load up their ships and say sayonara. But, if you wanted to sabotage peace, then you would get something going in Syria. And I suspect that the British will get something going in Syria.
Predicting such escalation is always concerning. Syria has already endured profound suffering. Any renewed instability risks triggering broader regional involvement with devastating consequences for civilians. The international community must remain vigilant to prevent further descent into violence and instead press for de-escalation and dialogue.
Our everyday reality for the past century plus has been basically the result of British geopolitics, as defined as, okay, let's say not invented, but at least articulated by Halford Mackinder at the turn of the last century. And basically the idea was, this is kind of big. We can't police it all with military and police forces. So what we're going to do instead, we're just going to do divide and rule. We're just going to pit people one against the other, keep them permanently at war, keep them permanently dependent upon us for financial support and weaponry. And they will all be in debt to us up to their eyeballs, and they will have to turn their natural resources over to our corporations, who, importantly, will fund those developments from our banks.
This is one of the more sobering critiques of neocolonial economic structures. Even in the absence of formal empire, financial dependency and debt have often replaced direct control. These cycles of indebtedness and resource extraction continue to shape global inequalities. It serves as a reminder that sustainable, fair economic partnerships, not exploitative arrangements, are essential if true long-term global stability is ever to be achieved.
And I think that's always been, it always is, the name of the game for these colonial powers.
What Alex outlines here may sound unsettling, but it's important to approach these topics with both clear eyes and sober judgment. History shows us that great powers often pursue narrow interests under the guise of stability, and the consequences are often borne by ordinary people. Yet the current shifts toward multipolar engagement, if handled with care, could offer a rare chance for more balanced international cooperation. It's not without risk, but there's potential for a more pragmatic and less interventionist path ahead. The key will be wisdom, patience, and above all, a genuine commitment to peace.